Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Death Space Filling the Void. I'm Patrick Jones, recording from Brooklyn, New York. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody, though by the time you're listening to this, it will already have passed. I'm very excited to share this episode with everyone. It's actually one of the first interviews I did after I decided to finally start moving this idea forward. In it, I interview my friend Eitan Levine. I know Eitan from performing at the People's Improv Theater, and we also worked at Cheddar for a while together. Eitan is a great person to interview for a podcast like this because he simply doesn't worry what people think about him. And he's incredibly open and honest, which is also what makes him a great comedian. It's also been interesting to go back and listen to how we were discussing the coronavirus. Some of it's changed, but for the most part, things are still the same. This interview came to be after Eitan wrote an op-ed for the New York Times on finding the humor in losing his grandmother to the coronavirus. Life is going to throw curveballs that are painful, but being open to and somewhat looking for the humor in life, I think can take you a long way. But before we get to the interview, I just want to mention that today's episode is brought to you by Garnished Entertainment. Are you missing your friends? Tired of unwinding in front of the TV? Losing your marbles ever so slightly? Shake up your night with a Garnished virtual cocktail event. Garnished Entertainment is a New York City-based mixology event company with the mission of bringing communities together through creative and entertaining virtual cocktail classes. Whether you're catching up with old friends, team building with colleagues, or looking for the perfect date night, Garnished would love to be your host. Let's garnish. Today's episode is also brought to you by My Software Tutor. Can Excel be my friend? Many people have wondered this for years. The answer is yes, it can. My Software Tutor offers 3 levels of real-time, Zoom-based courses with a live instructor. They all deliver practical, functional business skills in a friendly, supportive environment. These courses will increase your marketability, whether you're an employee, job seeker, consultant, or contractor. Register at mysoftwaretutor.com and use the promo code POD20 to save 20% off all registrations. Alright, I'd also like to mention to please follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And then I have another podcast called That Gives Me Anxiety. It's a show about the things that scare us and why they may not be so scary after all. As always, thank you so much for listening and enjoy. Joining me today is writer, comedian, all-around open and funny man, Eitan Levine. Did I miss anything?
Open and funny. I write for the New York Times, which makes me a legitimate member of the literary community.
That's true.
That means if I die, I get buried in the New York Public Library. That's what that's what that means.
Very easy contract, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone who's written an op-ed knows that they get buried in New York Times Public Library. But my favorite thing is that I've written for the New York Times and that I'm a 2-time AVM winner because for a documentary at this place I worked a couple years ago, I got to write Hamilton, which is the Hamilton porn parody.
So both a New York Times author and a porn award winner. You're like the full spectrum.
Because none of it matters. You know, if anything, first of all, every structure that we knew before coronavirus is kind of dead. So that's like the first thing you got to understand about this. And the second thing is that nothing matters. I think people limit themselves in, I guess, worrying about what other people think they can do. So I think that okay, I don't worry what other people think I do.
I know, very much so.
You know, like that's one of the, like, you know, I'm personally accountable. I make sure that I think that I'm morally okay with stuff and that I genuinely am trying and doing my hard enough. There's one thing I've learned that if I am true to myself, it doesn't really matter what other people, other people say. And
where does that come from?
I mean, truly, I think it's genetics, honestly. We'll talk about this, but my grandmother was very much, we'll talk about my grandmother, but she was very much of the same opinion. The other side of my family is very education-based, and everyone has a lot of degrees. And my grandmother did not have a lot of degrees, but she came to America, you know, she crushed in real estate, she crushed in the stock market, she made a very nice, big life for herself. And one thing that I always liked about her was that she was resentful of education almost. She was like, these idiots with their degrees and everything like that. Like, what else do you got to, it wasn't. So I think that that's where it comes from, is that I've always been, I keep myself accountable. And then as long as you keep yourself accountable, then you don't really have to answer to anybody else. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I
you're
agree. You live by
accountable in
your
how
code.
and you're accountable in how you deal with everybody and like you're not being shitty. Part of being accountable to yourself is also not being shitty.
As long as you stick to that code, you're doing all right, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the AVNs was just, the AVNs of the New York Times. It was like, yeah, I can write for the New York Times, but I can write for the AVNs. It doesn't make a difference. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I think that the limits that people put on this stuff is very much.
And it's almost like just taking opportunities as they come, and
mm-hmm.
not to be annoying, but just saying yes to the experience.
There's no reason why anybody, like porn specifically, baffles me. Why porn stars are like so, I guess, like minimized in society, because everyone watches porn. Mm-hmm. Like we all watch porn. And these porn stars, they have sway that you would not believe. I have porn star friends that have 500,000 followers on Twitter and stuff like that.
That'll get you pretty far in this world.
Exactly. Yeah. So now they have these platforms and stuff like that. So you can be a porn star and have 500,000 followers.
Right.
I don't know if that made any sense. We sort of.
It's okay. This is a forum for you to sort of speak your mind.
This is the first time I've spoken to someone today.
I always feel weird when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of mentioned it, but the reason why Eitan is on the show is, unfortunately, he lost his grandmother to coronavirus, and then ended up writing an op-ed in the New York Times about it, sort of finding the humor in the experience of losing his grandmother, or Bubby, during the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your grandma. Or do you prefer I call her Bubby?
I mean, I call her Bubby. People started calling her Bubby. That was unintentional. But people did start calling her Bubby. And people thought that was her first name, I think, was like the non-Jews out there. But but she was great. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. She's from Czechoslovakia. Oh, wow. Which is not a place anymore. Right. She is from, I think Jaromir Jagr is probably from her area.
Oh, nice. There you go.
Probably hockey fans out there. And she was in the Holocaust, through like concentration camps and everything like that. After she died, New York One ran an article on her. And I didn't know this story, but apparently when she was in the concentration camps, she would sneak bread in between her legs back into the barracks for her and for sicker.
My God. That's
so she
incredible.
was, she was a really tough chick. Yeah. And so she gets out of the Holocaust. Obviously, a bunch of her family dies in the Holocaust. So this is my favorite story about her. I didn't find this out until recently, also, because I started recording conversations with her. Was that
so smart?
She was fine until she died. That's a weird sentence. That's such a Jewishy. She was fine until she died. Making a Jewish baby. She was fine until she diddle died. So she was a 92-year-old with it as much as the next one, and then coronavirus happened, and then like within 2 weeks it was over. But so after the Holocaust, she was on the boat going from Europe to America. And the boat was run by an organization called the United Jewish Appeal. And the UJA had a problem and the problem was that like on this boat were all these scared Holocaust survivors who they're going to America. None of them have ever been to America before. And they literally all just got out of watching their families die.
Right.
So everyone's, traumatized, and they're on this boat. So the UJA is like, we got to have a series of events on this boat to boost morale. So they have like theme nights on this like Holocaust boat. And then apparently towards the end of the ride, they're like, let's have a beauty pageant on the Holocaust boat.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And my grandmother wins the Holocaust beauty pageant.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So then she gets to America, and the UJA this is from her, supposedly they pull her aside and they go, listen, we got to take pictures of all the survivors for donation materials, but everyone here is ugly. You're the hottest survivor. So they put a dress and makeup on her, and she ends up becoming like some sort of model or something for Holocaust donations.
That is, oh my gosh. What a crazy, crazy moment.
It's insane. So then she gets to America though, and she ends up. There's a longer story. I don't know what of it I can say, but she ends up like doing well in real estate, and ends up. She bought a building early on with like Nazi reparation money, and the reason why was because she was like, oh, I had this money in my pocket, and I looked around. I said like, well, what do people need? Where is it? And she's like, oh, everyone's in houses, so.
Right.
Like if I own apartments, like always, if someone's always going to need to live somewhere, and then eventually she wanted to buy more buildings and stuff like that. So she was like, oh, she's looking around and she's like, oh, you know what? The bridges and the tunnels, everyone always has to use, and electricity everyone's using. So she invests in the like the MTA and like Con Edison, like way, way, way back. And like that, does well for her. And that's.
So she came over here by herself?
Yeah.
Completely alone.
She may have had a sister with her. Yeah, she had a sister with her. She was supposed to. Very funny story about her is that she was supposed to. She gets off the boat, and she was supposed to go live with this guy, Bleenshoe, somewhere in New York. And so when she was on the boat, she was like, "Oh man, I'm going to America. Like it's gonna be awesome in America." And then she gets to Bleenshoe's house, and Bleenshoe lives in a dump. He lives in like a bad part of town, a broken down apartment. And my grandmother, Miss Holocaust, she is like, I'm not living here. And then she just goes back to the UJA on 72nd Street on the Upper West, and she goes, I'm not living in that place. And
oh my God.
And they go, who are you? And then she's
I'm Miss Holocaust. Yeah.
Yeah. She's like, I have the sash. No, she was like, listen, I'm here. This is unacceptable. Come on, guys. What can you? And then they're like, no, like go back. The way it works is that you come here to live with family. Like that's the family that's signed you. You have to be signed into America, essentially. So after like an afternoon of arguing with them, she ends up getting them to put her up at a hotel on 72nd Street with the stipulation that she would move out after she learned English. But they were also going to pay for her English lessons at Roosevelt High School. So my grandmother also would like to point out when she told me that, she was like, oh, I was taking those classes anyways, so I just got free classes.
That's amazing. So it just seems like she, with so much stacked against her, was able to create.
Yeah, she didn't know English. She knew a couple words in English. She was unmarried.
Only had her sister, had unsure housing.
I don't even know if her sister was there when she got there. I got to get this timeline right because I don't think they all came at once. And I know that there was I know that when they came, they were dispersed around a little bit.
Right.
So that's, it's a miracle. It really, really is a miracle that she accomplished what she accomplished. Like she figured out.
Inspiring.
She was also like such a feisty, finicky person. That's how it's really how she got through it, in my opinion. And it's that hatred of education and stuff like that. And why I think she just like stuck to core principles that she believed in and then like held to them, and then there were
great like analytical skills to break down like what she saw around her and what people needed and use that to her advantage.
She literally was just like, what's the simplest explanation to this? So like what I don't need to do anything like fancy or anything like that. Anyways, so then she passes of coronavirus. It was awkward. So she died
right
really at the height of in New York. Like early April, like late March, early April. And when she was doing fine, she was 92, living in Queens. Mm-hmm. She was doing fine. And then she got it. I remember that she got it. And then like immediately I was like, oh, like that's, like the people that were at that point, the people that were surviving it were like younger people.
Right.
And then like I remember a day or two afterwards, my dad was like, well, they intubated her. And once they intubated her, then I was like, done. That's it. Because it was 80% survival rate. 80% mortality rate on those ventilators early on. And then on top of that, 92 years old, and the people that were getting off those ventilators were not
coming
older
off
people.
Of them. Yeah, I remember Cuomo talking about it.
Yeah. And this is the first, I would say, kind of funny thing that happened. No, this is the second kind of funny thing that happened. Mm-hmm. Was we'll talk about the phone call that happened, but
yeah, I'm very interested in talking about the phone call. Yeah,
phone call was bananas. So, but the thing after she died, between that phone call when we said goodbye to her and when she died was about a week, and I remember that it was like a couple of days of like just waiting. Like every day it was like, oh, is she gonna like, she's she's not alive anymore. Like, how is she not dead? How is she not dead? Whatever. And I remember
That must have been so stressful.
It was truly, she was just like in limbo. But I remember I was watching a Trump press conference. He was like talking about hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, that's hydroxychloroquine. I was just like, oh, that's the name of it, like hydroxychloroquine. And then later that day, my dad goes like, oh, your grandmother's on some new experimental malaria drug, hydroxychloroquine. And the second he said that, I was like, fuck, that's it. If Trump is pushing this drug, then my grandmother is fucked. Yeah. So I get called one day. So after she gets ventilated, a couple days later, I get called and they're like, she's not coming off the vent. Do you want to say goodbye to her? And at that point I was afraid because I thought that they were going to use an iPad video thing to do it. And I did not want to fucking see that. That's
got to be absolutely terrifying.
And I will say, like, the one comfort that I had throughout this entire experience is that my grandmother was sedated and ventilated like almost immediately. Like she did not suffer. She didn't go through any of the loneliness.
That's great.
She was like, once she was out of it, she was right.
Done. That's what a lot of people are saying. The hospital workers have been depressed watching people pass away alone, calling out for family members and feeling so alone. So that's not the case. That was not the case with her, which is something truly I'm thankful for, that she they ventilated her immediately. So there was a talk like, oh, are they going to do like an iPad? Are they going to like do it through video call? I didn't want to do that. That was a thing. Also, I remember, and this was of all of the story that happens, this is the actual first time that I thought this was a little bit funny, was then I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to teach my mom how to do video calls. And I remember thinking like, this is not going to work at all. Not the time, yeah.
And then, so I didn't want to see it, and I didn't want to teach her, but then they were like, it's going to be a phone call. So I got told that they're going to do this phone call thing. And then I don't get told when. I just got told to expect it. And I didn't even want to do that because she was sedated already. So like, I'm going to talk into the phone to there's no recognition. It really is just, you're talking to the ether. Like you're saying words into nothing.
Right. Because she's unresponsive. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. It's unresponsive. They could have been like, hello, Levine family. Here she is.
Oh God!
Like for all we
holding it up to the air. Yeah.
They didn't do that. I would like to think they didn't do that, but at the same time, like it wouldn't have made a difference to me. Like if there's, you got to understand, my family is tough as nails. I grew up with Holocaust education. My cancer survivor. My mom's a nurse. My mom was a nurse in the Bronx. We are thick-skinned people. So I think that really pushed my family through this. Because there were things like that where like it was like like the comfort, like at least thank God she was sedated earlier. That's a thing that when I was talking to other people about it, who didn't have who I think were maybe not emotionally have that infrastructure to deal with this. I think a lot of them didn't realize stuff like that, where they were like, oh, you know what? My grandmother was sedated throughout. I didn't even think of that. When we said goodbye, she wasn't talking, and I didn't think that she may have been not sedated. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think that a lot of just, I don't know, it didn't hit us as hard as, and I thankfully, it hit us hard, but it didn't hit us as hard. I think it's because of that.
Right, she wasn't. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making sense here. I'm talking in circles. This is my first coffee.
At 4:30 p.m.
4:28 on p.m. Everybody at home. Anyways, my family were gruff people. We were able to handle. So I think that's why we were able to deal with this a little bit better than other people. That being said, it was fucking awful the entire time. So then my mom calls me and she's like, I didn't want to do it either, but the rabbi says that we should like call her and say Shema for her to hear like one last time. Shema is it's a Jewish prayer.
Okay.
It's kind of like it's our like big prayer. It's the thing where like if you're dying, like let's say you got shot and you're like dying, like you say the Shema as you're dying. Like you're supposed to, it's like the thing you say.
All right.
So I get told, expect a phone call. Okay. So this is also in the height of coronavirus. My daily activity, like every day I would wake up at like 12, smoke a bowl, watch the Cuomo press conference, and then and then go on with like whatever I had to do that day. Like no, everyone's sleeping schedule, especially in that early
wildly
time,
off. Yeah.
I had nothing to do. Like I had jobs that just ended. So it was like so everyone turned into like a degenerate. I think as a society, we turned into like an aimless
college dorm.
Yeah, we were just like, we're like, what do we do now? And then immediately, I was probably drinking like 2 Irish coffees a breakfast, at that point.
Yeah.
So I will say my favorite thing about those Cuomo press conferences was that he would go on every day and be like, guys, don't worry about it. Katz's Deli is making surgical masks. The M&M store we contracted to build ventilators. And Cold Stone Creamery is a hospital. Like, like everything
was a hospital.
It was just like it was like New York institutions were all of a sudden militarized to fight.
Right.
It was like every morning. This is a joke. But like every morning, I would wake up and just whisper to myself, "Don't die in the Jacob Javits Center today." That's it. Like that's it. I just didn't want to die.
I don't want to die where
Comic-Con is. That was my one goal throughout this entire thing was to not have some fucking right-wing doctor in fucking Central Park have to ventilate me.
Right.
Anyways, so the call comes in at like 12:30 in the morning. I'm not up. I am jolted awake by this call, and my mom goes like, "Hey, like my mom, she goes like, hey, like sweetie, like we're gonna do the call now." And then a nurse named Amanda. Basically, me and my mom are conference called into this phone call with this nurse named Amanda. And Amanda goes, also keep in mind, I'm like once again, pretty strong guy. I'm sobbing at this point. I'm bolted awake and told like, you're going to now have your last conversation with your grandmother. I'm pretty close with my grandmother. I'm legitimately very close with her.
You've always talked about her often, yeah.
Just fascinated me, and truly, I always very sympathetic ear to listen to. It was really awful what was happening. So I'm woken up by this. You're doing the call now. So I'm like, it's like a frantic. Yeah. I'm waking myself up, and then I'm like, yeah, sure, so she's like, what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go into her room. I'm gonna put the phone by her, and then you can take as much time as you want. Does that work for you? And I'm like, yeah. And like she's saying this, I like look down, and I'm only wearing boxers because I'm just waking up, and I'm like, oh, I have to put like a shirt on because like that's what I owe my grandmother. It's like these stupid things that like show up during the grieving process, or like during this. I literally was like, I cannot say goodbye to my grandmother without a button-down shirt on. So then I run to the closet.
Yeah.
And I put on I'm like buttoning a shirt. I'm not wearing pants. Like I'm like Tom Cruise, like in Risky Business, saying goodbye to my grandmother.
Imagine.
So then I sit back down on my bed, and it happens like within like 15 seconds. So she's like, we're going to go in there. We're going to put the phone by her. At that point, you can say whatever you need to say. Take as much time as you need. If you need anything, we're going to be right there. So you can just call. If you say our names, we'll be right there listening. Does that work with you? And I'm like, yeah, it works. It totally works. And
you got to be breathing so heavy, just trying to catch up to the situation.
Yeah. It was true. I'm crying. I'm crying, waking up, and like trying to calm myself down and getting dressed at the same time. And I'm like, and with my phone to my head, so. She goes, do you understand? Does that make sense? And I go, yes. And she goes, okay, I'm going to put on PPE. And then we're going to go into her room. I'm going to put you on hold for a second. And she puts us on hold. So I'm crying at this. I hear my mom crying on the other line, but she puts us on hold. But the problem is that the hospital's on hold music is like upbeat jazz. So I am crying to this tune of like boo bop doo bop shoo bop ba da ba doo ba boo boo ba boo ba doo ba da da boo da ba 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 doo bop boo bop. And then every 20 seconds, this like upbeat voiceover announcer comes on and is like, coronavirus is a very serious issue. Make sure to wash your hands and remain 6 feet socially distant. Boo bop choo bop boo da boo da boo ba boo ba boo doo bop boo bop boo da boo ba. Coronavirus is a very serious issue. Make sure to wash your hands and stay 6 feet socially distant. Boo bop choo. And she's putting on. This takes like 3 minutes.
Oh my
God. It's like 3 minutes of this like rotation of like jazz music Mountain Dew voiceover, jazz music. Like it was like if the Z Morning Zoo was in charge of saying goodbye to my grandma.
Prank call,
like
yeah.
Like it was like we're welcome back to saying goodbye to Bobby Live, like that. Like it was insane. And I'm listening to this, and at one point I just yell over, and I'm hearing my mom cry over this also. So I'm like, this is too upbeat. Like I just yell that at one point
into the universe.
And I don't. So this cycle is going on. It's just, and then all of a sudden there's a click and silence, and then Amanda goes like, okay, you're with your grandmother now. And then it was like being dragged from like this surreal, I'm thinking for 2 minutes straight, I can't ignore this fucking jazz music. Like I can't, this is all I'm hearing is loud jazz music, silence. All of a sudden I'm in this thing with my grandmother. So then my mom, says like, hi mommy, we're here. She's just, it was just a mixture of her saying like, we love you. Right. You mean so much to us, and then like sorries because it was because of what had happened. Like there was it wasn't our fault, but there was blame with it. Like it was awful that this thing was happening to her.
Right.
So she says that stuff, and then she goes like, "Oh, I'm here with Eitan," and then I say the same thing, and I just apologize. I honestly apologize a lot. I'm just like, I'm sorry.
That you had to apologize, just like.
I just kept on saying like it was I kept on saying it was unfair. I kept on saying I'm sorry, it's unfair this happened like this. It didn't need to happen like this. Like in different iterations of that. And then like with I loved yous. At one point I say like, you're the smartest person I ever met. Like you were always very sympathetic. You always had my back when I needed you to have my back, I think is what I said. And then my mom just says the Shema, which is like, takes about 2 minutes. It's all in Hebrew. The whole experience takes probably like 2 to 4 minutes.
Did
and then it was awful. It was really awful. It was there was no other way to it was no other way to describe it. It was just this was such a, who deals with this? Like no one has had to deal with these like remote saying goodbye calls.
Well, especially since so many people I feel like get hung up on the last thing that they said to someone who passed away.
We had to organize a conference call. Like it truly is absurd that it happened like this. And I think that's why at that point, and then I remember at the funeral itself thinking like, this wasn't enough. Like it felt like she was robbed of goodbye. And also this happened in the middle of a catastrophe. And I think that it took a couple of weeks for me to really, no, I take that back. It happened in the middle of a catastrophe. And I think that took away from it. Because it felt like
it took the edge off.
It took a lot of the edge off because it was like everything was happening, and then this was also happening. So this was a very sad thing. This was a very, very, very sad thing happening in the background of a very, very awful thing.
Right.
So I remember that.
Like your brain's already shifted towards handling something awful.
Every day, and this is early April, late March. Every day until that point, a new, remarkably horrible thing happened.
That's true.
And then it was like, this was just like fucking, it was, think about it until that point. Personally, I was on a high. Now my career's been fine, thankfully. I survived this, I think, for now. But I was touring as a stand-up comic. I had shows booked in Seattle, Des Moines, Omaha, Pittsburgh. We were supposed to go to twice. But I was supposed to do these shows in between April and March. And I booked all these shows personally. And I had, and that was, and on top of that, like I had personal career goals, things that were happening where like there were projects that I had gained traction on, I just got a new manager and stuff like that. And then fucking coronavirus happens. And then, so career wise, March 12th, probably, that's all done. So then I'm just sitting home watching this like virus, slowly get bigger. And you're watching Trump slowly, make this worse. And then every day is like a new iteration of stuff getting worse. And then this fucking happens. So then it was like, fucking, oh, your grandmother has coronavirus. So up until the point, that was the hardest thing that happened.
Right.
Then it was like, your grandmother got ventilated. Well, that means that she's dying. Until that was the hardest thing that had happened. And then saying goodbye to her, that was the toughest part of all of this. And then so when that happens, it was like, you're getting the shit kicked out of you for like a fucking month and a half, and then that happens. So it was like there was only so much worse. I didn't have emotion left at that point. Like it felt like so beat down.
Yeah.
And so it's weird that everything that was happening took away eventually from like the way that we said goodbye and like the funeral itself. So it felt like this whole experience had robbed her and us of that experience of saying goodbye until that point. I've since come to peace with it. Honestly, the article did great. A lot of people read it and stuff. So in a lot of ways, it felt like that had been the funeral, or like that had been the memorial that, like, you know, she deserved, that she had finally gotten. Personally, you know, like I would never speak for the rest of my family, but personally, I got a lot of closure with it.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. I'm curious, you know, the article and the stories you've told have a lot of humor in them. Where does that come from? Is it just the experience?
I'm a cancer survivor and the grandson of Holocaust survivors. We're the people that we laugh at this shit. Like, there's no other way to say this except for the fact that there's been so much stuff that's been bad that, of course, in the midst of this saying goodbye to my grandmother, I took out a notepad and just wrote down what psychopath chose this hospital waiting music. You know, like, and that's because, like, you know, you deal with the horrors and the awfulness. You're a beautiful white boy. So no, I'm saying, like, you're like, you deal with like tragedy so often that you eventually start to, if you live with it, then you can see the funny stuff in it. You see the mundane, you see, like, you know, like where the comedy kind of lives. I think that we're better at identifying the weird stuff because we always are anxious. People are trying to kill us. And then afterwards, we're able to kind of identify why that is weird in like a funny way to us. I mean, the next funny thing that happened was that we went to the funeral itself. I say that the phone call was harder than the funeral because the funeral was the funniest thing I truly ever attended. We get there, so there's a lot of really, really awful stuff, and then like heightened, like hilarious stuff. But like the first thing that happened was that we get there and there is a line of 8 other hearses, because this is a week after I had that conversation with her. Every day you're just waiting for her to die. Eventually she dies, and we're told there may be a delay because there's so many bodies. There's a backup. There's like a literal backup in the funeral home and stuff like that. You know, remember there were bodies just piling up in places? Yeah,
there was a news story of a morgue near me was using refrigerated U-Haul trucks because they were overflowing. Just awful stuff.
This is how bad that problem got. There was an article that came out, and the NY Post was trying to like gotcha to this funeral home. So the NY Post, I think it was the NY Post, but if it was something else, it was somewhere else. But they go up to this funeral home guy and they go, look at you, you're disgusting. You have all those bodies that are outside just waiting to be brought in. You just have bodies outside. And he looked at this reporter and said, tell somebody. Please tell somebody, because they keep on sending these fucking bodies and I don't have a place for this. So I hope you scoop this. He was like on the reporter's side. He was like, I hope that you can plan this and I hope we get traction on this, because there were so many buildups. So
that's hilarious.
You know, so they was just the most New York, like it was some like fucking like Hasidic.
Yeah.
It was some like Jewish Hasidic guy who was just like, tell somebody, report me. I beg you, report me.
Help me get out of this situation. Yeah.
I hope you cancel me. That would be the best gift you could do.
Dox me if you'd like.
I swear to God, every day I type in my name plus Jezebel.com, just waiting to be rid of this burden that is living in 2020. Okay, so the body gets out, and so we get told I have to rent a car. We go out to this like cemetery in Long Island somewhere. We get there. There's 8 to 9 hearses that are there. There's a literal line of 8 to 9. This is a funeral home that does 3 to 9 a day, and they were at like 25 a day at that point.
Oh man!
There was also like a legitimate line and stuff like that in waiting to bury. And on top of that, there was a paramedic had died, and so there was also a big fucking like firefighter funeral like happening with like 2 huge fire trucks with flags hanging down. This was a beautiful show of patriotism and a big fucking traffic problem.
It can be both, yes.
Yeah, no one ever thinks about the funerals that happened the day of the big firefighter funeral. How I'm just like stuck there, you know, waiting on, you know, in Wildwood Cemetery to get through. Eventually we get through. they drive her out, and then we get out. If you want to talk about like a couple of weird things that happen, is that the first thing is that it's a Jewish tradition that you're supposed to identify the body, that someone who knows the body or someone has to identify the body. Because of coronavirus, no one that we knew had identified the body. Because they couldn't open up the casket because of coronavirus, the rabbi was just like, what? We have to just bury her, so there's like that element that like went out. So now you're also talking about how the ritualistic side of this is now becoming an issue. Right. So we're at the grave basically, and the funeral director comes out and goes, everyone go to your car. And then we all walk back to our cars. And then 6 dudes in hazmat uniforms come out in those yellow hazmat uniforms, and they take her casket out. And these 6 dudes who we don't know in hazmat uniforms take her casket and put it in and they lower her to the ground. And then when they're done, they go very far away. It's also socially distant. This is, this is the height of the precautions,
Right.
So they go far away. And then, then we go to have our service. And the thing is, the rabbi we got a day of because our rabbi was sick. And this other rabbi we were going to use was too old. And his wife was like, you're not going outside because of coronavirus.
Certainly,
So we got to get this like last second rental rabbi. At the funeral, I joked, where'd we get him? A task rabbi?
So I read that. You included that in the article.
Yeah.
Crickets?
No one laughed.
Did you laugh?
I didn't I just nudged out. So I was like, hey, task rabbi. Right?
Oh, God.
And so what was funny also is that someone was like, what's task rabbi? And I was like, task rabbit. So then I would just describe.
Oh, you had to explain the joke on top.
Yeah, with like 3 people. I was like task rabbit. So I took out the phone and I'm like, look, it's 1 second. Let me download it. And then I had to download Task Rabbit to explain this joke.
People were that interested in learning the joke. I feel like people would just be like, just stop.
No, it was like, what do you mean? No, because everyone's like, what do you mean by this? What do you just, because like, it was one of those, it was a bunch of talky Jews. Task Rabbit? What do you mean Task Rabbi? Let me see it. Task Rabbi. Like Task Rabbit. Task Rabbit. What do you mean Task Rabbit? Like an app. Like an app? What do you mean like an app?
Oh,
like an app for phones? Like on the phone you can, so you rent a rabbi on your phone? No, I'm making a pun. I'm saying Task Rabbi is like the app. What is this app? What does it do? It's like you rent people. Like you have them come here, and then you can have them like hang. Yeah, and so that conversation is happening for a minute. Like not even. It's just so okay. So anyway, this rabbi though, we don't know who he is. He gets like 30% of the eulogy correct. Like he gets up there, and the first thing he says is,
"It's not a good percentage."
He goes, "We're here today to bury."
No.
1 second.
Oh my gosh!
I have it. 1 second.
He's got files with him, notes.
He's got a prayer by Siddur.
Okay.
Eventually, he's like, no. Miriam bat Leah. It's Leah bat Miriam. Leah bat Miriam. What a loss to the society. Like
with that confidence.
That was the thing. That was how he did it. He would like get it wrong, and then he would confidently say it a second time. So he would like say something. He would be like, a life in Poland wiped out by the Holocaust. She's from Czechoslovakia, actually.
Yeah.
A life in Czechoslovakia.
I'm cringing.
Wiped out by the Holocaust.
Oh my gosh. And
then at one point, so what was also funny was that he starts going around. He's like, she'll be survived by her daughters, Marilyn, and
this one,
Irene, who I do not know, but I can already tell is a fountain of her life that she brought on.
Did he?
He said it was. If it wasn't that, it was another. Countless. It was another like a pointless, meaningless, like
trivial. Addition.
Yeah. Who plants the seeds further that Lillian sowed? Like whatever, some bullshit. And then he starts listing us, and so he goes like, and the grandchildren, Jonathan, Jessica's daughter, and the great grandkids, Eitan, Avital, Tamar, Menachem, and Me, Avital, my sister, and Tamar, my other sister, are the grandkids, and two, Menachem, not a member of our family, do not know a Menachem. So at that point, he's just making up names. So we stop him there, and then because then he's like, her sisters. Okay, so what was weird was that in his prayer book, he had like funeral like he had like a eulogy of like a Mad Lib eulogies.
Oh,
like
God.
where it was just like blank spaces in like a speech. Like
I guess it makes sense to have that.
He literally went to my mom before the speech and was like, okay,
Noun.
let me, okay, we got a name, give me a pronoun, an adjective, an adverb, the name of you and your sister. What camp did she escape? What Israel charity did she co-chair? And Leonard Cohen quote.
How are people taking this? Are they like, is there like chatter, groaning? Like,
while he's doing this, I'm standing next to my mother, and every time he gets something wrong, I'm just like, no. And like every third thing he gets wrong, I speak up. So one by one, we're all speaking up. So then, oh my God, this was another thing. This is how he starts off. This is how we actually started off. He goes, Marilyn told me before the speech that your mother was working in the kitchens at Auschwitz. And, my mother also worked in the kitchens at Auschwitz. So maybe they knew each other.
Oh, man. Man.
You're like, what? They like cool?
Yeah.
Like,
that's great.
Maybe.
Must have had a fun time there. Yeah, right.
What a fun memory. What a cool. What do you want me to say there?
Yeah. So that's not a question. There's no response to that.
I'm like, yes, that may have been true. Correct.
Yeah.
If that would make sense if that was accurate. And it may be. So then after he starts getting all of our names wrong, he starts trying to list like my grandmother's sister and everyone on my grandfather's side. And at one point we just stop him and everyone just starts naming the relatives and starts pointing. Like my mom's like, I'm Irene, that's Marilyn, these are the grandkids, and then Shindala was the sister, and then Blinshu was the uncle. You got him. It wasn't the father. It was like at that point we're just correcting.
Like when you go to a concert and like, they stick the mic out to the audience to be like, you do this, it.
Yeah, exactly. And then we're playing the hits right now. So after he's done butchering that, then it goes to, and he also, what's funny, he listed her, the endearing part about this is that he had her as 93 years old. So then I give my speech. I obviously kill it. I had her at 92 though. She told me 92. And then my sister gives a speech. My sister speaks very well. Very, very well. Actually, she was reading a speech from my other sister who was in Israel at the time. And my other sister had her at 94. So we don't know her real age. She told everyone different ages. We got no idea. And she's from the Holocaust. So like her papers are gone. Like it's all a guess.
Oh, okay.
We got no clue.
Like, she was like trying to screw with everybody by a year or like.
Yes. So there is that thing where like it's possible. Well, one of the things that, when she came to New York, one of the ways that she was able to get jobs was to age herself up. Because they didn't want to hire like a kid, but they would hire like a teen. So like that, she was 14. She could say she was 16 or 17 maybe. So there was like that element to it.
Yeah.
We have no clue. There's like no way for us to know it. What is actually funny also about this is that my grandfather, one time, I don't know if this is accurate at all, but one time we were in the house in Queens, and my grandfather goes, we were reading an article about the oldest taxi cab driver in New York, and my grandfather goes like, I'm 4 years older than that putz. And so I don't know if that's accurate, but my grandfather also lost his papers. He claimed that he was older than that oldest taxi cab driver. So who knows?
Right.
So then, because what was kind of fucked up is that, so after my sister speaks, I speak, my sister speaks, my cousin says like a small little thing, and then we have to bury him. Now the problem is that if you're Jewish, some people have a custom where you don't leave until the casket is fully covered in dirt. The four sides are covered in dirt. Usually, you're able to get the gravediggers to do this. However, because of social distance and the fact we only had one shovel, everyone put a little bit in, and then I had to essentially shovel my grandmother. Like I had to bury my grandmother like by hand by myself. I think I had it like at 5 to 8 minutes, something like that, of just burying to silence.
What's going through your mind at that point? Is it just blank, or?
I just kept on thinking like, this is so fucked up. This is so fucked up. This is so fucked. Also, I remember looking to the side, and what was kind of funny about the funeral was that people were one person was recording it on their cell phone, and one person was live streaming it from their cell phone. So it was like a fucking world star hip hop video.
To share to family members that weren't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one from at home, I don't know who the other, there was also 2 people there who we didn't know until afterwards. They were friends with my grandmother, but they were younger. Okay. I don't know where, but some people are just filming this. So I'm like shoveling for
filming you physically burying your grandmother.
Yeah, dude. And I just remember thinking like, this is so fucked up. And then right towards the end, I was like, oh, I've just buried a body. Like I've buried a body. I know what it takes to bury a body.
Information you never thought you'd
come
across or know.
No, it also was funny. I think I'm in the best. It happened because I was in the best shape of the family, and we wanted to get out of there. Yeah. So at some people like did dig a little bit, but eventually I got nudged. I was like, go over and
take care of this. Yeah.
So there was that. So then I buried her and that was, then we went back to the car, and then when we got to the car, we started laughing about it because it was
that quick.
We were wearing face masks, which I thank Christ, because we were laughing on, this was so fun. It was, you couldn't have if I scripted it, and I've been trying to script it right now, and it's the easiest, it's the hardest and the easiest thing to write, because it's easy because I'm just transcribing what happened, but it's also hard because you would not believe everything from we were in the parking lot looking at the hearse and just being like, I can't believe that's Bubby. Bubby's in there. I cannot believe Bubby's in there.
Yeah.
Actually, wait. That's what? It's one of these 3 hearses. Because usually the hearses are like, they're not in the same area ever. So you're doing
not usually a traffic jam of hearses. Yeah.
Just you don't see multiple hearses, except for like the entrance. It was bananas what was happening. When that sort of happens, what do you fucking do? What do you do? The article, I think I sum it up incredibly, better than anyone would ever be able to sum it up at all. But that funeral was like a macro look into coronavirus, because it was being terrified and sad and feeling real shitty about the situation, but then also being like, look who's fucking running. Like, this is hilarious what is happening. Like, this is truly like a very funny thing that is going on. And, looking around and being able to say, like, who are the schmucks that are running this is...
to quote you, you said the coronavirus is a deep, dark life lesson in how to experience something awful while quietly leaning over to your neighbor and whispering, "Can you believe these schmucks?"
There we go. Oh,
I think that's great.
I think that this is where I'll open up the conversation to you now more, because I think there's an element to this where I'm curious what you feel. I think that do you know anybody that's like died because of coronavirus or anything like that? Like, how connected are you to it?
Just a few people removed. No one directly, thankfully.
Okay, but you feel it. I'm sure you felt.
Oh, Eitan. Well, I live in Crown Heights, and in my neighborhood alone, I mentioned the U-Haul truck at the morgue, but also people have been doing walk-by wakes where they just stand outside their building and people walk by in the street, and everyone's crying, and you just feel that like they want to console each other, but
can't. You physically can't.
Physically cannot. Yeah.
My theory on this and how it ties into comedy is I think that America's comedy, the world's comedy sensibilities are about to get way darker. I think that if you look at what military vets and cancer survivors and people who've been in accidents and just like terror survivors, if you look at the stuff that they laugh at, it's always darker. And I think that society as a whole is going to be traumatized by it. Nothing has ever hit everybody the way that this has happened. So I think that, I think darker, realer comedy comedy that really addresses darker subjects in a way that's very human-like.
I can absolutely see that being the case. I already feel more jaded. I don't really have time for lighter comedy.
Can you imagine if like you were in a club and, you know, someone went up there like, who's on Bumble? Like,
yeah.
That would be insane. You can't, the biggest thing that comedians are dealing with now, I think, is that a lot of jokes that we had before that were staples now, it's like, well, like, who cares? Like, who fucking cares about this, like, dating take or something?
It's almost like such, a 12 million pound gorilla in the room that like you have to address it.
Yeah. So then it becomes like, how do you address it? How do you talk about the worst thing to ever happen? And that's the other thing. I think that people are stupidly trying to compare this to stuff early on when they were like, this is as bad as the 2008 recession. You know, I'm just like, what are you fucking talking about? Nothing. This is worse than everything that's ever happened. This is the worst thing to ever happen.
Right. Like, there's a recession, as of recording this, there's 115,000 people in the U.S. alone dead. That's more than the soldiers the U.S. lost in World War I.
And then the residual effects, like we're gonna hear the suicide and OD stats and the residual PTSD, the societal PTSD. We're just getting started. The fixing is going to be the biggest, challenge with it.
Yeah.
Hey.
And we're not getting out of it anytime soon, unfortunately.
Nope. This is 9/11 again. Did we get out of 9/11?
No.
And this is at least, this is bigger than 9/11, and we didn't get out of 9/11. So,
right.
But then I do think that what's interesting is that there's no one to blame for this. So,
well,
no one to blame, then the thing to blame is science and logic and competency,
which has been under fire quite a bit lately as well.
So maybe that doesn't get blamed. Maybe society, through their voting, decides to stop blaming science for helping us.
That's a hopeful thought.
Yes.
Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I am just curious in how this changes your outlook when you're thinking about death for yourself personally or through friends and family, or I'm curious to get your thoughts.
The first thing that I think of with that question is that I had friends that had it way worse than I had with coronavirus. I've had friends lose parents. I've had friends lose multiple grandparents. I've had friends lose parents and get evicted, not evicted, but like who have had to like move away and stuff, there's, I think that if there was ever a time to look at how to take stock of the good stuff in your life, then this is the time to do that. That's one. I think two, it hasn't changed my view on death at all. It didn't change my view on death, but I think that when I was 10, I thought about death. I had cancer when I was 10 years old. So,
right.
You overhear conversations about life expectancy, and you put together like, oh, they're talking about you, and and you kind of figure out what that means and stuff this has always been in my purview. And on top of that, like straight up, how many fucking Holocaust, assemblies did I go to every month in high school and regular school? And I think that death is so part of the Jewish narrative that we are predisposed to being exposed to. We're all exposed to it, I think, more than other people.
Certainly.
So who knows?
Yeah. There's been a lot of tragedies, but
this hasn't changed my death outlook at all. I think is my takeaway from this.
Right. Well, thank you so much for everything you've shared. It's truly an interesting perspective to laugh in the face of such a tremendous tragedy.
Yeah, it's going to be the thing that gets us out of it eventually. There's going to be a bunch of, I'm telling you right now, over the next couple of months, we're going to have those things where like, the first home run is going to be a big deal for us. That's going to bring society out. Like the first.
It's a great point. I remember Mike Piazza hitting a home run right after 9/11, and that's still something that brings tears to my eyes watching.
And the first opening weekend for a Marvel movie. That's gonna be wild. You know what the thing is? I used to think that Endgame, that what the hype and everything around Endgame could not have been beat by anything ever, because it was a culmination of it was 12 years of the biggest thing culminating into one event. We're at a point now where a lot of this stuff we've been taking for granted is coming back, and it's gonna be you have to look at those moments. And be like, oh, fuck, like, that's awesome,
Right. Like, Endgame was great, but that first time we can all go into a restaurant and order mozzarella sticks is real nice.
It's gonna be fucking. It's like those wins, and it's gonna be. I think that New York in this city, the summer in the city is gonna be awful because it's gonna be, Corona is still gonna be lingering and stuff like that. But I do think it's gonna be a lot of fun also because the tourist stuff isn't open, and a lot of stuff is gonna be shut down. So it's gonna be a lot of people just walking around, grabbing walktails,
Yeah.
So
drinking in the streets. Yeah.
Who fucking knows? Yeah, drinking. I will say also that's a very white. Privilege.
Yes, it absolutely.
It's not New Orleans just yet for everybody in America.
Well, thanks again.
Thanks for having me, dude.
Of course.